Thank you for inviting me. It's certainly an honor and a privilege to be able to talk at this session, and I'm very excited about some of the talks here that are coming after me. My focus is mostly on natural soundscapes and how it defines place. My background is that I'm an ecologist and a geographer, and I'm interested in the ways in which we can use sound to help study how nature works. And so what I'm going to do here is kind of give you a brief background on what is a soundscape based upon some publications that we've produced in the scientific literature. Summarize a little bit about how we go out and collect the information and analyze it, and then just kind of hit some highlights of some projects that we have ongoing in the lab, which tend to be fairly high profile. It's been getting a lot of media attention lately. So in terms of background, we've defined a soundscape very much like Murray Schafer has, which is the acoustic profile of a place over time, but we're also interested in the ecological and the social kind of signatures that define that place. And we use a variety of taxonomies to help understand those places. But in particular, we're very interested in sound sources, and the three broad sources of sound, and in particular those that are the voices of the landscape from the animals, the biophony, the sounds of phase changes, changes in energy that are created by climate and atmosphere, water, ice, and then the sounds that people make, everything from noise, but also those cultural sounds like church bells and evening chants in Muslim communities that help define that place very specially for us. And so some of the places that I go are really cool, very remote. I spent a considerable amount of time, for example, in Borneo, where at one place there are over 750 animals that can make sound. And so what we're trying to do is develop tools and techniques to allow us to classify and measure those changes over space and time, and then study it in the context of both ecology and evolution. As an ecologist, I oftentimes get asked, well, are you doing signal detection? You want to know what animal is there. Oftentimes I go to a place, I don't know what is making those sounds, and there's not a person on the planet that does. And so what I'm interested in are sounds of all animals and their acoustic niches, and how those spaces are partitioned and occupied over space and time. It tells me a lot about the ecosystem, but it also tells me about the animal community and how they function and interact. So when we go to a place, we oftentimes look at the sounds, listen very carefully, and try to associate the sounds to the classic biomes, the ecosystems that exist around different areas around the world. And so, last year I spent some time in Patagonia trying to understand and analyzing, for example, the sounds that glaciers make during calving events, during changes at night when temperatures are very different than during the day. So we're trying to use sound as a means to understand ecological dynamics. As a geographer, I'm also interested in how humans associated place ecology with sound. I've done some work in Mongolia. I'm going back in a few weeks here with a bunch of artists and musicians, where we're trying to understand these the sonic and music practices of cultures and how they relate to the natural soundscape, the natural landscape, and the animals that exist there. Let me give you a little bit of an overview of some of the approaches that we use. It ends up generating a lot of data. Here is a sensor that is installed in the Sonoran Desert. We're interested in how landscapes recover from wildfire, and how do different kinds of communities and different types of habitats respond to these kinds of important changes. So what we do is we go out, we do a rapid assessment, we take these sensors, we put them out, they record continuously. They have two microphones. One here was actually eaten by a bear, so this one's kind of funny. But anyway, you could record and program these and set them up. We also have some solar radiation panels, and so we're collecting a lot of different information. We then deploy sensors, and we have these sensors go generally for a year. The ones in Sonoran Desert went for 3 years continuously, 10 minutes on, 50 minutes off of the duty cycle. We also deploy sensors in grids in transects to get an understanding of the spatial variability. We have to use SneakerNet. None of this is wireless. We have to go out, collect information, and then we calculate a variety of indices. Many of these are just based upon things like entropy and diversity. And then we do analyses looking at space and time, ARIMA models for time, temporal dynamics. And then we bring information into things like geographic information systems, and then integrate it with satellite technology like LiDAR data, MODIS, and some other kinds of satellite data layers to be able to kind of give us a sense of the spatial temporal, what we call disturbance framework. We collect a variety of information. Here's my team out here on the left here collecting a lot of just in situ data. We also do things like take photospheres of every site so that we can perceptualize these areas. This is a study in Costa Rica. And then the LiDAR data here gives us a sense of the three-dimensional structure of the vegetation. We're trying to correlate both natural soundscapes and plant vegetation. So some of the things that we do is we look at indicator species. This here is the greater tinamou. It is a threatened and endangered species in the Costa Rican rainforest. So we're oftentimes putting out sensors and saying, is that species there or not? Sometimes we develop some simple taxonomies, looking at indicator species like frogs, parrots, howler monkeys, things that are common and that are easy for us to detect with data mining and some other machine learning algorithms. Our lab has been a leader in developing software that is being used around the world. Things like the entropy index and some others. So we oftentimes use these to kind of to classify and quantify. And then we use things like computational musicology approaches to be able to extract out, looking at signals, the patterns in signals, and putting these into clusters and to hierarchical arrangements to be able to look at the complexity of a soundscape over space and time. So some of the data that we get helps us to understand the ecosystem over long periods of time. So it's one of the few methods where we can go out, put an instrument, and then record something continuously. So we can look at things like peak biological activity during seasons and then during different parts of the day, such as the dawn chorus. Some of the things that we're learning, for example, is that the nighttime soundscape is very different from the daytime, but it's also much more intense and much more diverse. Just a bit of a summary of our research programs, where we're going. Right now, I am trying to understand every significant global biome right now and record continuously at each one of our major biomes. And so right now we have over 40 studies. Each one also goes to what I call reference locations, so that we can go to places like the eastern steppes of Mongolia, have sensors going continuously and compare these against the grasslands of the North American systems. So we're doing compare and contrast, and we're also looking at major disturbances such as invasive species, climate change, grazing, wildfire, a lot of different kinds of disturbances on these landscapes. Through the National Science Foundation, I also host global workshops trying to train people how to use our tools. Right now we've had, 7 workshops hosted around the world. We're going to have one next month in Mongolia. 112 individuals from 12 non-university organizations. So we're oftentimes partnering with national parks to be able to kind of get our studies ongoing. So a lot of these studies and some of these workshops involve people from all over the world. We're also developing online tools. We have 300 terabytes of data, ecological data, that you can now query online. We have a system that you can download and install, for example, and then go in and then just listen to every one of our, I think we're at about 2 million different, we have about 2 million recordings. Everything's very, very interactive. We're also working with communities to map out noise, and then community soundscapes. And so we have a study close to Chicago in Northwest Indiana. We're working with them to map out noise levels, pollution levels, noise pollution levels, but also try to get a sense of what are the sounds that define a community. We're finding that trains in particular help define the coastal communities in this area of the world. So we're oftentimes working with communities. Here we are just about 2 months ago, trying to map out the definitive soundscapes in these areas and collecting some information about what do they really value. Things like singing sands, barking dogs, the sounds of basketball. All these things help define these communities. We're putting together community booklets and guides for people to kind of use. And then finally, we have something that's called Record the Earth. I launched this a few years ago. We have an app. People can go and download the app. And then we have a map interface where they can go and then begin to analyze data about what are the sounds that they hear, but also how do they emotionally attach to these sounds that are in their recordings. So you can go and do an analysis of time, space. All this is online. Go to recordtheearth.org, and you can ask questions like, where are there soundscapes that make people happy? What are soundscapes that make people curious, that amaze them? So how does that affect their emotional and analytical? And we have big data analytics that go to these. So let me just say, I'm just kind of wrapping up here, that a lot of the work that we're doing is really been covered a lot by the media. There's a photo here of me in Borneo, got on the cover of Science a couple years ago. NOAA did a special series. I was just on CNN just a couple of months ago. And then we just produced an IMAX film. This is actually being shown in Edmonton right now at the TELUS Science Center. I'm the executive producer of this, and this is our center there and some of our work in Mongolia. But if you wanted to learn a little bit more about sound and place and some of the things that we do, you can go and visit this. It's designed mostly for kids to get them more excited about natural sounds and kind of opening their ears. So it's called Global Soundscapes, Mission to Record the Earth. So our funding has been quite good lately, and most of it's come from the National Science Foundation, also from Purdue. But let me just say that most of the hard work is done by my very talented students and staff. I just go out and have fun at some of these really cool places.
Thank you. So, Joe, you can share your screen if you like.
Got it, yep. I just lost the Zoom for a sec. Here we go, share screen. Oh, Brian, I think you need to stop sharing your screen.
Oh, you're right. Let me do that. That's easy. Go ahead.
All right. Cool. Let's hope we don't get some crazy feedback here. Let's see. Oh, here we go. That's easy. All right.
Good.
Cool. Everybody can see this now?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
All right. Excellent. That was super inspiring. First of all, my approach very, very different, a little bit more intuitive, not as data driven, but definitely playing with data. My name's Joe Patitucci, and I have a kind of an art project that turned into a company called Data Garden. And so I'll just give you a quick little history on what like how we started and how we got to what we're doing right now. And if İpek, if we could listen to the Plants FM broadcast,
yeah,
that would be great.
okay.
So we're gonna listen to some plant music. I think there's an installation there, but then I also have this website called Plants FM. So you can tune in to listen to live music generated by a plant at any time, like 24 hours a day. I always have at least one plant streaming at all times. So how does all this stuff work? Well, I started this in 2011. Data Garden started as a record label, actually. The idea was just to create a label where we weren't just like producing a bunch of vinyl and a bunch of plastic that's going to end up in the ocean. We were looking at like just new ways of releasing electronic music. So originally we were actually just releasing music on these download cards that had seeds embedded in them and that could grow into flowers. And that's kind of where the idea of Data Garden came from. And to release, to start this label, we kind of started making these events and these interactive arts festivals, these kind of like engagement initiatives. This one called the Switched On Garden, where we had we had all these art installations all over this huge garden. It was like 56 acres, ran like 2 miles of electrical cable, and had this like walking, wayfinding, sonic experience where people were connecting to trees and nature in different ways. Had a lot of artists doing kind of interactive works. After doing that, that being successful, we were asked by museums and other institutions to curate and produce more work, and then we just started to think about this idea of Data Garden, how to kind of like activate this kind of brand that we had created, that was all informed by this history of electronic music and the history of like bio arts and all of these kinds of things. So that's when we started to look into making plant music. So it was just like a further exploration of like biological, generative, and digital arts, and that was inspired by a lot of different artists here, like Mylis, who's been making plant music, I think, for the last like 17 years. We kind of got into this like plant consciousness stuff as well from the book The Secret Life of Plants, and of course the film, and some of the some things that were happening back then. Brian Eno, of course, just making amazing ambient music, this music that balances the idea of of control and surrender. So by like setting up processes to allow a composition to kind of like create itself. And Hermeto Pascual, who is doing some fun, there are a lot of people that were doing like kind of interspecies collaboration, but there's a fun one that he did called No Zoo. And Tim Knowles, who's an artist, visual artist, who basically attaches, who's attaching pens to tree limbs, and then as they were blowing in the wind, it would create a drawing. And then our scientific inspiration was, cellular automation, just the idea that simple rule sets can express themselves as complex forms, and holographic theory, and how like kind of unseen, like the implicate order of the universe is expressed in the physical world through interaction with other forces. Carl Sagan's just like a huge inspiration, just the way that he makes all of this kind of stuff pop. And Jagadish Chandra Bose, who is doing research on plant consciousness and plants' ability to feel. And then Cleve Baxter, who was who's working for the FBI doing polygraph tests, who decided to connect a plant to a polygraph and discover that there were changes that were happening in the plant that were very similar to humans. And a lot of his experiments weren't able to be replicated. And that's where I think that's where we saw like an opportunity to kind of like pick things up and just play with that idea and see what happens. So we first showed this work at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. We called it Data Garden Quartet. And what it was is there were 4 plants in a room. Each plant was playing its own instrument. And so they were all connected. You could walk up to any plant and like hear its data being expressed as like harmonious sound. I designed all of the sounds to be really like harmonious, and I designed them to encourage people to spend a lot of time in the space and relax. The thing is, plants move on a much slower time scale than we do. So if you're going into a room and expecting like for a plant to immediately respond to something that you're trying to get it to respond to, it's not very likely. The thing that's great about this is I think it really teaches people to slow down and to listen, and it's like had a huge impact on my life in that way. But one of the things that was really cool was to see how different people were responding to it. We saw that like children a lot of times had this super intuitive connection with the idea of plants playing music. In fact, one young girl, she was like, I don't know, like 8 or something, she just walked up to the plant and just started waving her hands like this. And she just said, "Hey mom, look, all you have to do is think light coming through your hands and the plant will sing for you." And it's like, where is this kid getting this? This is so wild. Like, but then meanwhile, there were other people that were coming in over, it was like 3 days, there were thousands of people that were coming to this installation. And I was sitting there just observing how people were interacting, and every once in a while, someone would walk in, and one of the plants would just completely change the patterns in the music that it was playing. So I would look up and see where that plant was, and see who was standing closest to it, and just walk up to them, tell them what I experienced, ask them about themselves, and they all invariably would say in one way or another, "Oh yeah, that makes total sense." And then they would go on and tell me what they do. So they would say, "Oh yeah, that makes total sense. I'm like a Reiki healer. I'm a like Reiki master, energy healer. I'm a botanist. I'm a florist." So there are these people that deeply identify with having connection to subtle forms of energy, and then people that have like a deep connection to plants. And they also just kind of take for granted that, yes, of course, the plants would respond to me just by the fact that I walked into the room. So for me, that was something new for me. I was open to that idea, but to experience something where it seemed like there was this interaction that was clearly happening, that was really exciting to me. And I used that as inspiration for myself to just like kind of learn how I could tune into those energies without necessarily having to use technology. And then also, I'm not necessarily like, I'm not a scientist, you know, so that's not my role here on Earth is to do the science on it, but I'm really good at like creating experiences. So I just saw this as like, this just shows that I need to create this experience more. I need to make this experience available to more people. So let's see. Oh, sorry about that. Oh. Sorry about that. So how did I make this experience available to more people? Well, you have in your room there, I believe there's a MIDI sprout connected. And we're all listening to a MIDI sprout right now. The MIDI sprout is basically the technology that I used in this installation that we we've packaged and made it available to more artists. 'Cause as I was doing installations around the country, things like people really wanted the installations, but the artists that came out, like we would get like 20 artists coming to us asking us to build something for them, you know. So we just decided to do a Kickstarter. In 2014, we did that Kickstarter, and then we've since released about 500 MIDI sprouts now. So they're like 500 people all over the world making their own version of plant music, and it's really amazing to just see how this is spreading and how everyone has their own kind of artistic practice related to it. So yeah, we did that, and then I launched Plants FM, I think, in September of 2016. And I actually just kind of launched it. It's funny, so many of the projects that I start are kind of like ways of generating awareness for other projects that I'm doing. And then these new projects end up being like whole other things that go off in this direction, which is kind of fun. So Plants FM was started just to kind of promote the MIDI sprout and also to kind of test. I do a lot of installations. I do like longer term installations, and then I want to stream longer term installations. I wanted to just test how long could I have a plant hooked up without touching it. Like, could I just like go and travel the world and leave this with my roommates? Will it just run? And the answer is yes. So that's great. Plants FM is just like was kind of like a test to see how this works. And I was really surprised to see that we were getting about 50 listeners a day, listening for about 30 minutes average. A lot of people are listening like 8 hours at a time while they sleep. A lot of people are listening while they're doing like yoga. I've had yoga teachers tell me they use it for their classes. Other people use it when they're writing or when they need to concentrate. So there are just all these benefits to having this like harmonious, like generative music experience. And then what we've got is more and more people want this in their home that aren't necessarily artists that can like design sounds for it, etc. So there's this desire to have this out there in the home. So right now I'm working on a project called Plant Radio, which is actually going to be an expansion of Plants FM. And Plant Radio is going to basically be it's going to be an app paired with some hardware that one can put on their plant and like stream to their phone, and they can listen to plants. They can listen to their own plant through their phone. They can listen to other people's plants around the world. So that's what we're looking at doing. And then we're looking at also partnering with research institutions that and other like natural areas that might want to have this technology there connected to their plants, so that we can kind of see over time what's happening. Like, are there major shifts that happen? Just like when someone walked into a room at the installation, like what happens when there's just like a major event in a place, whether it's an earthquake or something else? Is there something that we could see in data before and after? Like, what if we look at like the plant record, you know? So that's what we're looking at doing. And then meanwhile, I'm also recognizing that like while plant music is really therapeutic and it has great potential in terms of creating and holding space for different experiences and for slowing down. In fact, like I use it, and a lot of people have been using it in like along with different healing modalities. The thing is, it's hard to make like a one-to-one correlation between an activity that's happening in like on the physical plane and like the music that you're hearing. It's really hard for a lot of different reasons. Partially because of the sensors that we're using are just measuring changes in conductivity, and then also partially because we're not plants, so we don't we don't know what's going on with those changes. So I'm also working on a project that it's going to be an app that I'm developing for wearables. That's going to where I'm going to generate music based on our own biorhythms and our own changes in our own biorhythms. So that's going to be a meditation app. And that's going to allow us to actually like navigate by our own biological functions through sound. And the advantage to that, like I recently got an Apple Watch, and I like just started checking out like what are the biofeedback meditation apps that are out there, and so many of them are like virtual reality based and like visual based. Like, wow, that's like not the part of the brain that you really are looking to engage in meditation. When you're seeing things, it's like more prefrontal cortex, like more the front of the brain. So yeah, but through sound you can kind of get to more of the emotional centers and like feeling, and that's really what I'm looking to cultivate, I guess, more in my life. So that's my interest in doing that. So so yeah, well, this all started with plants. It's gonna probably move a little bit more towards humans, but we'll continue to do plant work. And I think by connecting this sort of technology or these sound systems that I'm developing to humans, I think we'll have when we can connect that to the plant system that we'll develop, and when we have everything going at the same time, we're going to be able to see a lot more in terms of real-time data relationships between ourselves and plants. So with that, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Gürkan had an emergency, so he recorded